How is Node most often used? We can use it for scripts that do things on our computer, our local machine. For example, to read and write files. But in the majority of cases, we use Node to create servers, to build web and mobile applications that connect to databases, provide user data, and things like videos, photos, and other content. And our servers also provide security features, like allowing users to log in. In order to understand how we'll be applying what we learn in the next few videos, including when we apply it in our final project, we need to get a bit of a lesson in backend technology and how it compares to the front end. Now, if you're already familiar with working with backends from front-end development or working with backends in other runtimes and programming languages, this might be review. But we need to make sure we have our fundamentals in place. When it comes to the web and even mobile, there's usually this idea of a client and a server, the front end and the back end. The front end here is your browser or mobile phone. It's what you see on the screen as a user. The back end is what happens behind the scenes, where we tend to have things like security features, input validation, and most of our business logic, especially if it's something like intellectual property. That's core to our product, and we want to be in full control over it. For example, business logic like how Google determines the ranking of websites when you search. This top secret algorithm that's so important to how Google works. And on the back end, we tend to talk to multiple different servers, providing services that we then put together in some meaningful way for our application. Let's think about this from the top. What happens when I load a website, like google.com? I'm telling my browser here, go find google.com. And it's going to go where Google has their servers for the front page of Google. And it's going to make what we call a request and say, hey, server, can you give me some data for whatever is on that page? It could be the Google logo, the header, or the search bar. The server will then send back what we call a response and say, okay, here's the data that you need to display this page. This can include static files like HTML, which is the hypertext markup language used to lay the page out and, for example, separate the logo from the search bar. We might have JavaScript, which we use to perform actions on that page. Or CSS, to provide the visual styling and appearance of that page. The language that the server uses to talk to the client and the language that the client uses to send requests for data to the server is called HTTP, or the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. HTTP is used to transfer these files from the server to the browser. And oftentimes we'll see HTTPS, which is the secure version of this protocol, where all communication between the client and server is encrypted to help keep our data secure, in case someone tries to come between us in the browser and the server. to snoop on what we're saying, spy on us, and steal our data. Thankfully, most websites use the secure version of HTTP by default now to make sure our data is secure when it's being transferred over the internet. So there's nothing suspicious going on here. All right, but say we load Facebook.com instead, and we have a page that's more dynamic. We might ask the server, hey, I just logged in. Can you give me the data for my user and the data for my friends? And the server is going to say, no problem, here it is. But rather than sending that data in files that are static like we saw before, it could send the data back in a number of formats. The data could be JSON or XML, or even just plain text data. Where JSON is our JavaScript object format, or JavaScript object notation, using our curly braces and key value pairs, just like in JavaScript. And an alternative format is XML, which looks a lot like HTML, where we use these pairs of tags. And for example, here in our correct version, a pair of tags can have some data. That's what the backend is for. It serves us the data that we need on the front end, on the client side, to show something useful to the user. So how are backends made? We can use any language and runtime that you want. You can use Node, but also Python or Ruby, Java, or the Go programming language. And when we write code in those languages to serve our data to the front end, we call our code backend code. Now, you might be asking, why do we need the server to send us data at all? Why don't we just keep the data in the front end and do everything there? Well, on the server, we do things that we can't or shouldn't do on the browser. Things like security, logging our users in, and input validation, where the client can send us data that we don't expect, and we need to make sure that it matches our needs. This idea of a client-server architecture that we just talked about is used by most of the web. And building out that server side is what most Node applications are built to do. Our front end is almost always written in some form of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But the back end can be in nearly any programming language. Node allows us developers the huge advantage of programming the backend and front end in the same language. And it provides dozens of other benefits that we're going to be talking about throughout the course. So let's get to it. I'll see you in the next video.